Listen closely. What I'm about to tell you is not a story. It is a fracture in history. A crack in the fabric of time that lets something unspeakable seep through. Imagine a boy knocking on your door in the dead of winter, his lips blue with cold, his voice breaking as he pleads for warmth, for food, for mercy. Every instinct in you cries out to protect him because that's what you're supposed to do when a child suffers. That instinct is the oldest form of programming, older than scripture, older than law. It is the sacred impulse to preserve the young. But what if the boy was not a boy? What if behind those pale eyes was not innocence, but calculation, not desperation, but hunger? What if the child at your door had already lived 3 decades, studying you like a wolf studies sheep, waiting for you to open the door so that your ruin could begin? This is not folklore. This is not a fireside ghost story. This is Salem County, New Jersey, 1841, the winter when a figure emerged who would come to be whispered about as the boy who never grew. His name was Joshua Bennett, born in 1809, but cursed, or perhaps blessed, with a body frozen at the age of 12. He looked like a child. But he thought like a man who had learned to weaponize your compassion. For years he drifted across New Jersey's farmlands, moving like smoke, slipping into the lives of families who believed they were rescuing him, until they awoke to find themselves gutted of everything: money, valuables, even reputation. But Salem County was different. Something happened there that tore open the myth and exposed the predator for what he was. Something that reveals not just the story of one twisted man, but the hidden mechanics of power itself. How illusions are built, how innocence is staged, and how entire systems of control feed on your instincts, your kindness, your morality, your faith, until they own. The people of Salem County remembered the winter of 1841 not for the cold, but for the silence that followed. It was the kind of silence that clings to you after you've been lied to, when you realize you've been played, that what you thought was real was a mask designed to strip you bare. That's what Joshua Bennett brought to these quiet farmlands. He didn't just take their money. He took their sense of safety, their belief in charity, their faith in the goodness of strangers. Joshua had learned early that the greatest prison a man can be locked inside is his own morality. A farmer may bar his doors, hide his gold, guard his livestock with rifle in hand. But when a trembling child comes begging, he unlocks everything. He opens his home. He hands over food. He offers warmth, shelter, trust. And in that act of mercy, he delivers his family to the executioner. This was the genius of Joshua Bennett. He exploited the very values that communities swore to live by. He knew the scripture they recited. He knew that every household heard weekly sermons about the duty to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and shelter the orphan. He knew that in Quaker towns like Salem, refusing aid to a suffering child wasn't just unkind, it was a sin. So he played the role to perfection. He mastered the art of appearing helpless, even holy, when in truth he was dissecting his hosts like a surgeon. He cataloged their lives, their habits, their weaknesses. He would laugh with their children, bow his head in prayer, and whisper bedtime stories while quietly plotting how to gut the family from within. And yet, here lies the darkest truth. Joshua Bennett was not an accident. He was not simply a freak of nature who never grew. No, he was a revelation of a principle the powerful have always known. The mask of innocence is the most effective weapon of control. Think of it. Institutions hide behind the meme. Picture it. November 18th, 1841. A storm rages across the farmlands of Salem County. Snow falls in thick, wet curtains, drumming against windows and swallowing the roads until every path vanishes into white oblivion. Inside their farmhouse, the Hartwell family, Samuel, Patience, their 3 children, are preparing for another long night of wind clawing at the shutters. They are not expecting a visitor. But then comes the knock. So faint, so fragile that at first Samuel believes it is only the branches scraping the roof. He carries a lantern to the door, opens it against the shrieking wind, and what he sees becomes a memory that will gnaw at him until his dying breath. A boy, thin, pale, drenched in snow, no older than 12 by appearance. His lips quiver, his arms are wrapped around his chest. His eyes, unnatural blue, gleam like shards of ice in the lantern light. His voice breaks when he speaks. "Please, sir, I've been walking for days. My family, they're gone. The fever took them. I've nowhere left to go." You can imagine what happens next. Patience Hartwell, stern but maternal, pulls him inside with the urgency of a woman who sees God's commandment before her eyes. The warmth revives him almost instantly. Steam rises from his clothes as he stands by the fire, and the children cluster around him with awe. His name, he says, is Joseph Crawford. Orphaned, lost, alone. The Hartwells never stood a chance. Joshua had done this dozens of times. He knew the rhythm. He told just enough tragedy to tug at the heart, but not enough to provoke suspicion. He shivered with believable weakness, coughed at the right moments, let his voice crack with the sorrow of a boy who had seen too much. And when the Hartwells brought him food, he ate with gratitude that felt so authentic, it disarmed even Samuel's cautious eyes. But the moment they left him by the fire, his gaze shifted. Shh. Joshua Bennett was not careless. He was not reckless. He was meticulous, an artist of deception. Inside the Hartwell farmhouse, he carried himself as though every gesture, every glance, every sigh had been rehearsed, because it had. This was his method. Step 1. Dissolve suspicion. Joshua understood that people believe what they want to believe, not what their eyes show them, and everyone wants to believe that a lost child is innocent. So he gave them innocence, crafted, precise, irresistible. A shy smile here, a nervous stutter there. He spoke softly so they would lean closer, which made them feel protective. He ate slowly, as if ashamed of his hunger, so they would feel generous. Every motion was a hook sunk deep into their hearts. Step 2. Observe. While Samuel prayed aloud in the evenings, Joshua's eyes roamed the room. He noted which shelves bowed under the weight of ledgers, which drawers were open most often, which pockets Samuel patted absent-mindedly when he thought of money. He counted the seconds it took for sounds from the barn to reach the house. He catalogued where keys were kept, what valuables were locked away, and what treasures lay forgotten. By day, he was a helpful orphan. By night, he was a spy mapping enemy territory. Step 3. Erode boundaries. He knew that trust is not stolen in one moment. It is cultivated. He made the children laugh with silly tricks, folding scraps of paper into birds. He praised Martha's beauty with the innocence of a little brother. He shared in Thomas's chores until sweat ran down his brow, earning the boy's grudging respect. Even Samuel, guarded and suspicious, began to soften when Joshua recited scripture with unexpected eloquence. He was no longer an outsider. He was becoming family, and that was the trap. Step 4. Strike. But not yet. Joshua never rushed. He would wait until opportunity and circumstance align. The weeks passed, and with every sunrise, Joshua's mask grew stronger. By December, the Hartwells no longer thought of him as a stranger at all. He was Joseph now, their Joseph, woven into the rhythms of their lives so seamlessly that they scarcely remembered a time before his knock on their door. That was how the predator worked, not by forcing entry, but by becoming indistinguishable from the family itself. And yet, even the most flawless mask eventually begins to slip. It started small. A few pennies gone from Martha's little collection, a silver thimble missing from Patience's sewing basket. The family dismissed these things as absent-minded mistakes, lost in the bustle of tending the farm, misplaced in the confusion of Rebecca's recurring cough. No one wanted to believe a child under their roof was stealing from them. The thought was too poisonous, too shameful. To accuse Joseph would be to admit their trust was a mistake, and men hate nothing more than confronting their own blindness. Joshua counted on that. He fed on it. But then came the day when Samuel, weary from his daughter's illness, went to his strongbox. His fingers brushed the familiar iron key in the root cellar, and when the lid creaked open, he froze. Nearly half the money was gone. Not a single pouch missing, but coins carefully reduced from each bag, deeds lifted selectively, Promissory notes vanished like smoke. This was not the clumsy theft of desperation. This was surgery, precise, calculated. Samuel's blood went cold. He could not accuse Joseph aloud. What kind of man would admit he had left his home vulnerable to a boy? No, he first suspected a neighbor, or perhaps his own brother-in-law Ezra, who always eyed the Hartwell prosperity with quiet envy. Suspicion began to coil through the family like smoke, settling on everyone but the true culprit, the smiling boy who bowed his head at prayer. And when Samuel Hartwell discovered the missing fortune, he did not shout. He did not storm into the kitchen and accuse the boy who sat by the fire with Rebecca nestled against his side. Instead, he closed the strongbox slowly, as if afraid even the sound of the lid might betray his panic. That is the terrible thing about shame. It silences men when they should speak. And shame was all Samuel felt in that moment. Ezra Thornton, Samuel's brother-in-law, arrived 2 days later. A Philadelphia merchant, well-dressed and sharp-tongued, Ezra had always doubted Samuel's supposed success. He looked at the farm not as proof of diligence, but as a delusion, an illusion that would one day collapse. Now, standing in the parlor with his gloved hands folded behind his back, he listened as Samuel admitted that hundreds of dollars were gone. Ezra's smile was thin, triumphant. "Nearly 200? And you've no idea where it went?" His words stung more deeply than the loss itself. Patience sat rigid, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Martha tried to insist nothing in the house had been disturbed. Thomas watched Joseph with a suspicion that had been simmering for days. But none of them spoke the truth aloud, that the boy was the only new element, the only unknown in their lives. To even think it felt monstrous. To accuse him felt like heresy. And that was Joshua's genius. He had placed himself in a position where suspicion became unthinkable. He was the orphan, the victim, the child. He was the one they wanted to protect, and so their minds recoiled from connecting him to the theft. Instead, Samuel tortured himself with questions. Had he miscounted? Had he misplaced the deeds? Was he losing his memory? The weight of humiliation bore down heavier than the weight of poverty. But here is where the story deepens beyond one farmhouse. Because what Joshua did on a small scale is what Einstein. Thomas Hartwell was only 13, but hardship had given him an edge most men never acquire. He was wiry, sharp-eyed, and carried the weight of farm chores that forced him to notice details adults often overlooked. Unlike his parents, Thomas was not blinded by the scriptural duty to protect Joseph. He watched him with the suspicion of someone who sensed a predator, even if he could not yet name it. It was a simple moment that nearly cracked Joshua's mask. Thomas had been struggling with a frozen gate latch, cursing under his breath as the iron refused to give. Joseph appeared, offering to help. Together they pried at the latch until it snapped free. Thomas stepped back, breathing hard, and in that pause he realized something troubling. Joseph was too strong. His hands were too steady, his grip too practiced for a boy who claimed weeks of hunger and weakness. "You're awfully tough for someone who's been sick," Thomas muttered, narrowing his eyes. "And you know a lot about farming, too. More than me sometimes." Joshua felt the words strike like a blade, but his performance never faltered. He tilted his head, let a stutter crack his voice, and whispered, "Peepaw taught me everything before the fever took him." His eyes glistened at the word paw, and Thomas hesitated. The performance was flawless, almost. But doubt had already taken root. That night, while the family prayed, Thomas studied Joseph instead of bowing his head. He saw how the boy's eyes flickered, not toward heaven, but toward the key rack near the cellar. He noticed how Joseph recited scripture too perfectly, as though rehearsed, like a man performing lines in a play. And for the first time, Thomas understood that the danger was not outside their farmhouse, but sitting cross-legged by the fire. But suspicion in the mind of a child is powerless when adults refuse to see. Thomas told Martha once in whispers. The storm outside deepened as December crept forward, but inside the Hartwell home a more dangerous storm was taking shape, a collision between suspicion and illusion. Thomas watched every move Joseph made, but he lacked the power to act. The boy who never grew had already secured his throne in the household, wrapped in layers of trust so thick they suffocated truth itself. Joshua, of course, sensed it. Predators always sense the eyes of their prey. He noticed Thomas's lingering glances, the way the boy's brow furrowed whenever he spoke, the faint edge in his voice when he asked too many questions. Suspicion had sprouted in Thomas's heart, and Joshua knew that if left unchecked it would grow into certainty. Certainty was dangerous. Certainty could unravel everything. So he adjusted his performance. He made a game of involving Thomas in small victories, fixing tools, repairing fences, splitting logs. He let Thomas win arguments about trivial farm chores, so the boy would feel respected. He even confessed made-up fears, whispering in the dark that storms frightened him, that he missed his imaginary sister's laughter. It was calculated vulnerability, a dagger hidden inside a tear. But beneath the mask, Joshua's calculations turned cold. Thomas was a threat, and threats could not be tolerated. On December 14th, fate delivered the opportunity. Rebecca, the youngest, fell into a burning fever that left her hallucinating and gasping for air. Samuel rushed to harness the wagon, determined to get her to the only doctor within 20 miles. Patience insisted on riding with them, leaving Martha and Thomas behind with Joseph. The storm raged, snow thick as ash in the sky. In the distance, the clatter of hooves faded into silence. Joshua stood at the door, watching the wagon vanish into the night. Alone with Martha and Thomas at last. Alone with the strongbox, the jewelry, the theft itself was silent, invisible. By the time Samuel's wagon creaked back up the frozen lane with Rebecca half asleep in her mother's arms, the strongbox was lighter, the family's history already stolen, their security already severed. And Joshua, smiling, attentive, solicitous Joseph, was waiting by the fire with Martha and Thomas, as though nothing had passed. But Thomas knew. He couldn't prove it, couldn't name it, but he felt it. A weight in the house had shifted, an unseen presence pressing down on him. He looked at Joseph that night and saw not a boy, but a shadow wearing flesh. For nearly a week, the deception held. Samuel, drained by worry over Rebecca's recovery, postponed his usual counting of the strongbox. Patience, distracted by the chaos of nursing her daughter, didn't notice the missing jewelry or silver. The Hartwells lived in ignorance, unaware that their hearth had already been hollowed out. It was December 22nd when the truth clawed its way to the surface. Rebecca still coughed through the nights, and Samuel, desperate to pay Dr. Fleming for more medicine, descended into the root cellar. The cold air bit at his skin as he lifted the iron key, turned the lock, and opened the box. What he saw inside nearly stopped his heart. Half the money gone. Deeds missing. Notes vanished. He gripped the edge of the box until his knuckles whitened, bile rising in his throat. Rage, humiliation, despair, they collided all at once. He wanted to call Patience, to call his children, to demand answers, but shame chained his voice. For to admit the truth would mean admitting that he, the protector of his household, had been outwitted. The timing could not have been crueler. Ezra Thornton had just arrived with his family, a man whose sharp tongue was matched only by his delight in Samuel's failures. Samuel could already hear his brother-in-law's voice dripping with, Ezra Thornton's presence was a hammer in a house already cracking. He swept into the farmhouse with his merchant's coat dusted in snow, his voice booming, his eyes scanning every corner as though searching for proof of Samuel's incompetence. To Ezra, the Hartwell farm was not a home but a stage where his brother-in-law's failures might finally be revealed. At supper, the table bent under the weight of food Martha and Patience had labored to prepare, but no one tasted joy. Samuel sat stiff, his fork moving without conviction. Patience watched him with silent worry, her hand brushing his arm, but he would not meet her eyes. Thomas glanced between Joseph and Ezra, his mind whirring. And Joseph, Joshua Bennett, played the part of quiet gratitude, eating sparingly, smiling shyly, offering polite thank yous that made Ezra sneer. Ezra leaned back, his voice carrying a venomous amusement. Tell me, Samuel, How fares your fortune these days? I hear whispers that times are lean, or perhaps you've hidden your wealth too well, eh? The words were a blade. Samuel's jaw tightened. Thomas saw his father's hand tremble as it set the fork down. Ezra pressed harder. You've taken in another mouth to feed. Noble, yes, but perhaps unwise. The world has a way of punishing men who mistake sentiment for prudence. Joshua lowered his eyes, the picture of wounded innocence. Martha rushed to defend him, her voice sharp. Ezra, he is no burden. Joseph has been a blessing in this house. Thomas's blood boiled. He wanted to shout the truth, to accuse Joseph then and there, but his throat closed. No one would believe him. Not yet, Dot. The tension shattered when Samuel finally rose, his voice low but edged with steel. This is my house, Ezra, and my affairs are not yours to pry into. Ezra smirked, savoring the crack in Samuel's composure. A man so defensive must have something to hide. Joshua. Thomas could not sleep. The farmhouse breathed too loudly. Rebecca's coughing in the loft, Martha's prayers murmured through the walls, the faint creak of Ezra's boots on the floorboards. But beneath it all was another sound, one no one else seemed to hear, the whisper of deceit, the sound of a mask being adjusted by candlelight. Dot. He crept from his bed that night, bare feet cold on the wooden floor, and peered into the parlor. There was Joseph, Joshua, kneeling by the hearth as though in prayer. The fire painted his face in flickers, shadows sharpening his features until he looked older, harder, almost inhuman. His lips moved, but no words escaped. Thomas realized with a shudder that he wasn't praying. He was rehearsing. Dot. The boy's skin prickled. He retreated silently, but not before Joshua turned his head just slightly, as though aware he was being watched. Their eyes did not meet, yet Thomas felt it. The predator had scented him. Dot. By morning, his unease boiled into defiance. Over breakfast, when Joseph bowed his head with saintly calm, Thomas spoke without thinking. Why do you always pray so perfectly? No one prays like that. You sound like you're reading it out of a book. The words landed like stones. Martha gasped. Patience scolded him sharply. Thomas! But Joshua only smiled, serene, the mask unbroken. I reckon I do, Miss Patience. Pa always told me to give my best words to the Lord. His voice cracked on Pa, that same manufactured note of grief, and Martha's heart melted. Dot. Yet Thomas saw it. He saw the calculation. He saw the performance. And his anger flared hotter than his fear. Dot. That night, he cornered his father in the barn, where the lantern light cut long shadows across the hay. Pa, he whispered urgently. It's him, Joseph. He's not what he says. He's lying. He watches the cellar. He looks at the key. I seen him down there. Samuel's face tightened. It was the silence of Thomas's defiance that unsettled Joshua. Most children, when dismissed by their elders, folded inward and abandoned their suspicions. But Thomas did not retreat. He watched more closely, spoke less, and carried himself with the tense quiet of a boy sharpening a knife in secret. Joshua had seen this before. In Charleston, it had been a maidservant who caught him rummaging where he ought not. In New York, it had been the son of a merchant who noticed his stories never aligned. Each time, suspicion began with a child, for children alone had eyes unclouded by pity. And each time, Joshua learned what must be done. Suspicion must be snuffed out before it grew into truth. On December 24th, the opportunity presented itself. Snow fell heavy, drifts rising against the sides of the farmhouse. Ezra was arguing with Samuel in the parlor, their voices heated. Samuel straining to keep his composure while Ezra's laughter cut him like a blade. Patience busied herself with Rebecca's fever, Martha tending to chores. And Thomas was sent to the barn to fetch kindling. Joshua followed. The barn was silent save for the wind rattling the boards. Thomas knelt over a bin of wood, his breath puffing in small clouds. When he turned, Joseph was there, standing in the doorway, a shadow framed by snowlight. Why do you keep staring at me, Thomas? Joshua's voice was soft, almost kind. Thomas straightened, defiance blazing in his eyes. Because you ain't what you say you are. You're a liar. You fooled them, but not me." For the first time in months, Joshua allowed the mask to slip. His smile thinned, his eyes sharpened, and the boy Thomas had accused of weakness now stood with a presence far larger, far older than his years. "You should be careful with such words," Joshua murmured. "They can make folk think you're bitter, jealous, and then no one listens to you." Christmas Day dawned gray and bitter, the kind of morning when the sun seemed unwilling to rise. The Hartwells gathered for prayer and a meager feast, but joy had no place at that table. Samuel's silence was heavy. Patience's hands trembled as she passed bread. Martha hummed a hymn under her breath to keep from weeping. Ezra, by contrast, was alive with smug energy, his words sharpened to draw blood. "You've grown quiet, Samuel," he said between sips of cider. "Perhaps the burden of your household is too much for one man, a farm, a wife, children, and now," he gestured toward Joseph with a smirk, "a stray. Charity's a fine thing, but it's costly." Thomas gripped the edge of his chair. He wanted to shout that Ezra was right, that Joseph was the costliest burden of all, but fear pressed against his throat. Across the table, Joshua lowered his eyes, playing the part of wounded humility, every twitch of his mouth designed to deepen the Hartwell's pity. Samuel's hand slammed the table. The sound silenced even Ezra. "Enough," he muttered, his voice ragged. "I will not be lectured in my own house." Ezra only smiled. "Then at least tell me this. Is your strongbox as full as your pride, brother?" The room went still. Samuel's face drained of color. The children froze. Even Rebekah's cough seemed to pause. For in Ezra's words hung the unspoken accusation that Samuel's fortune was gone, that he had failed not only as a farmer, but as a father. Joshua leaned back in his chair, silent, a shadow among them. He did not need to speak. Ezra was doing his work for him. Every barb widened the fissures in the Hartwell family. Every silence from Samuel tightened the snare of humiliation. Thomas saw it. He saw how Joseph thrived in the cracks, how his eyes flickered with hidden delight at the storm unraveling around him. For the first time, Thomas understood the scale of the threat. Joe. The Hartwell farmhouse seemed smaller with Ezra inside it, every room tighter, every silence sharper. He pressed Samuel at every turn, questions about crops, about debts, about the wagon that carried him to town. He spoke loudly so that all could hear, needling Samuel's pride until the man seemed to shrink in his own home. At first, Samuel met his brother-in-law with stern refusals. But Ezra was cunning. He did not ask outright about the strongbox again. Instead, he wove his barbs into conversation like hooks in a net. "Strange how Providence tests some men more than others," he mused one evening. "And stranger still how a man can labor his whole life and see it vanish overnight." The words were casual to Martha and Patience, but Samuel's face betrayed him. His hand shook as he poured his coffee. He could not look Ezra in the eye. Shame is a quiet poison. It does not kill quickly, but it seeps through bone and marrow until every thought is colored by it. Samuel carried the weight of the theft alone, too proud to confess, too broken to act. Nights found him pacing by the cellar door, the iron key hot in his palm, as though staring long enough might restore what was lost. Joshua watched it all with the satisfaction of a craftsman admiring his work. He needed only to sit quietly at the table, bow his head at grace, and let Ezra's venom finish the job. The Hartwells were unraveling themselves. But not all of them. Thomas had begun his own quiet hunt. He remembered every word Joseph had spoken, every inconsistency in his tales, every glance toward the cellar when he thought no one noticed. He rifled through the barn loft, the pantry, even beneath Joseph's bedding when the chance came. But Joshua was careful, too careful. There was no scrap of evidence, no trinket stolen, no careless mistake. Until one night, while taking feed to the livestock, Thomas found something. Thomas carried the locket like a burning coal. By day it pressed against his thigh, a secret so heavy it threatened to bend his spine. By night he took it out beneath the thin light of the loft window, turning it over in his hands, whispering to the cold glass, "This will be his undoing." But he was young, and secrecy leaves traces. His glances toward Joseph were sharper, his silences longer, his movements more deliberate. And Joshua, ever the predator, sensed the shift. On the evening of December 26th, the household gathered around the fire, the storm howling against the shutters. Ezra drank heavily, his laughter bitter as he mocked Samuel's restraint. Patience soothed Rebekah, Martha embroidered by the hearth. Joshua sat quietly, pretending to read a tattered book of sermons, but his eyes were not on the page. They were on Thomas. The boy stared into the flames, jaw tight, fists clenched, as though daring himself to speak. Joshua watched the tension, the way Thomas's body seemed wound like a spring. He knew then. The boy had found something. Later, when the house slept, Joshua rose from his bed without a sound. Barefoot, he moved through the dark halls with the certainty of a thief. The loft ladder groaned faintly under his weight, but Thomas did not stir. He lay curled in blankets, chest rising in steady rhythm. Joshua crouched low, searching. Beneath the bedding, nothing. Beneath the straw mattress, only dust. Then he saw the uneven plank by the wall, the kind of hiding place a child thought clever. His fingers slid over the wood, pried it loose, and there, tucked inside, was a folded scrap of paper. He read by moonlight. "Joseph is not who he says. He has fooled them all. I must find proof." A thrill surged through him, not of fear, but of delight. The boy was cleverer than most. But cleverness in children was a dangerous thing. It made them reckless. It made the... Thomas woke before dawn, as he often did. But something felt wrong. The loft was colder than usual, the air thick with a silence that seemed to press against his ears. He pushed back the blanket, crept to the loose plank, and lifted it. The locket was still there, the folded scrap of paper too, but when he touched it, he knew. The crease was sharper, the fold tighter. Someone had read it. His stomach dropped. He clutched the locket in his fist, heart pounding so loudly he feared it might rouse the house. He checked the shadows, half expecting Joseph to step from them, smiling that slow, poisonous smile. But there was nothing, only the faint creak of the farmhouse settling in the cold. Joshua knew. That day Thomas worked harder than usual, chopping wood until his palms blistered, hauling water until his back ached. He needed movement to keep from shaking. He dared not tell his father. Samuel was too far gone in his shame. He dared not tell his mother. She would dismiss it as childish spite. And Patience, gentle as she was, would only hush him for stirring trouble. He was alone. And Joseph knew. Joshua, for his part, played the role of innocence more perfectly than ever. He fetched water for Martha without being asked, read Psalms with Rebekah at her bedside, even offered Ezra his chair at supper. To the Hartwells, his piety shone brighter against the gloom of Ezra's cruelty. Only Thomas saw the subtle glances, the quick flicker of Joshua's eyes when no one else was looking, the faint curl of his lips that said, "I've seen your secret, boy, and I will use it." That night, Thomas lay awake, clutching the locket in his palm. He understood now that keeping it hidden was no longer enough. If Joseph had read his vow, then Joseph would act. He needed more, something undeniable, something even Ezra could not twist against him. He whispered to himself in the dark. The words, Joshua did not rush. A lie, like a noose, must be tied slowly, each knot tested for strength. To strike too soon was to risk doubt. But if he waited, if he wove the story carefully, the Hartwells themselves would slip the rope around the boy's neck. He began with small gestures. When Martha asked after a missing needle, Joshua suggested gently, almost apologetically, that Thomas had been restless of late. When Patience misplaced her thimble, Joshua recalled how Thomas had lingered by her sewing basket, always soft, always uncertain, as though defending Thomas at the same time he cast suspicion. It worked. Doubt, once planted, spread quietly. Meanwhile, Thomas scoured every shadow for evidence. He searched Joshua's bedding again, sifted through the barn loft, checked the cellar door at night. But Joshua was too careful. The man left nothing. All Thomas had was the locket, and even that felt fragile, a single thread against the weight of Joseph's performance. The turning point came when Ezra, half-drunk, accused Samuel outright before the family. "You had a fortune once, brother," he sneered. "Where is it now? Buried under this wretched farm, or squandered on that orphan you've taken in?" The words struck like a whip. Samuel rose, trembling, his face pale with rage and humiliation. "Enough, Ezra. I'll not suffer your poison at my table." But Ezra only laughed, eyes gleaming. "Then prove me wrong. Show me the strongbox." The room went still. Martha gasped. Patience reached for her father's sleeve. Even Rebecca stirred from her sickbed, whispering through fever, "Papa?" Joshua sat silent, head bowed, a picture of humility, until he raised his eyes to Samuel with perfect sorrow. "Perhaps Thomas could fetch it," he said softly. "He lingers near the cellar often enough." The suggestion was a dagger slipped beneath the ribs. Samuel turned sharply toward his son. The house was colder than the storm outside. Samuel had not spoken a word after supper. He sat by the hearth with his Bible open on his knees, though his eyes never moved across the page. His hands trembled, as though the words themselves accused him. Ezra prowled like a jackal, savoring the silence. "Strange, isn't it?" he said, pretending casual talk with Patience as she mended by the fire. "A boy skulking near the cellar, a missing fortune no one will speak of. One begins to wonder if Samuel's house is built on sand." Patience flushed, needle shaking in her hand. "Uncle, please." But Samuel did not defend himself. He only stared into the flames, jaw clenched, lips moving faintly in prayer, or perhaps in denial. Joshua watched from the corner, his posture humble, his eyes lowered. Every word Ezra spoke pressed deeper into Samuel's pride, hollowing him out. And still Joshua did nothing to stop it. He didn't need to. His silence worked like a blade Ezra never knew he carried. Thomas, standing in the doorway, could bear it no longer. "It's not Father," he burst out, voice cracking. "It's him, Joseph. He's the liar, not us." The room froze. Patience gasped. Martha dropped her spool of thread. Ezra's smirk widened, scenting blood. And Samuel. Samuel rose from his chair, so violently the Bible fell to the floor. "Enough, boy." His voice was thunder, his face white with fury. "I will not hear this wickedness from my own son." Thomas's throat closed. The words tumbled in panic. "I found the locket, Mother's locket from the strongbox. He had it. I swear it." But his hand went to his pocket, and it was empty. The locket was gone. For the briefest instant, Joshua's eyes met his. Calm, patient, victorious. Thomas's voice faltered. He reached again, frantic, but there was nothing. His proof had vanished, and with it, his last chance to be believed. "Do you see?" Samuel Oriyurkan, O-O-R-ed, pointing a trembling hand at him. "Your tongue is poisoned, Thomas. You will repent these lies at once." Ezra leaned back in his chair, grinning like a wolf. Joshua bowed his head in silent sorrow, the very image of the maligned innocent. And Thomas, burning with shame and terror, realized what Joshua had done. The war was no longer secret. The battlefield was the family itself, and he had already been cast as the enemy. Thomas sat alone in the loft, knees pulled tight to his chest, the empty pocket a wound that would not close. The locket was gone, stolen from him, just as surely as his voice had been stolen at the table. No one believed him now. Worse, they believed Joshua. Below, the house hummed with a new order. Samuel moved like a man struck by illness, worn and wordless, leaning on Scripture for comfort, but finding none. Patience avoided Thomas's gaze. Martha hushed Rebecca whenever she asked why Thomas had shouted, and Ezra prowled with fresh delight, whispering to Patience that the boy was troubled, that such tempers were dangerous in a God-fearing home. But Joshua was the most dangerous of all. That night, after Samuel had withdrawn to his bed and Ezra's snoring filled the hall, Joshua entered the kitchen quietly. Thomas, sleepless, watched through the railing above. Joshua lit a single candle, sat at the table, and folded his hands as though in prayer. His voice was low, almost tender. "Lord, forgive young Thomas," he murmured. "The boy is consumed by envy, by anger. Give brother Samuel strength to guide him, and if it be thy will, let me bear the weight of Thomas's hatred." It was a perfect performance, a knife disguised as piety. Thomas bit his lip until it bled. He wanted to leap down, to drag the truth into the open, to rip away Joseph's mask, but the memory of his father's fury chained him. One more outburst, and Samuel might cast him out altogether. When Joshua finished his prayer, he sat quietly, staring into the flame, and then, slowly, deliberately, he drew something from his coat pocket. The locket. He turned it in the light, the silver glinting, his smile hidden in the shadows. Then, with careful fingers, he set it in the very center of the table, where Samuel would surely find it in the morning. Thomas's breath caught. Horror gripped him. Joshua wasn't on. Lie stealing proof. He was planting it. And when Samuel discovered it, when the locket appeared as though Joshua had kept it safe all along, Thomas's word would be ashes. For the first time, Thomas's courage failed. He crept back into the loft, trembling, a terrible truth sinking into his bones. Joshua wasn't merely winning. He was rewriting the story itself. Morning came gray and brittle, the storm still lashing at the shutters. The family gathered in the kitchen, weary-eyed, Samuel stiff with the weight of another restless night. He sat at the head of the table, reached for his cup, and froze. There, gleaming in the pale light, lay the locket. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "My mother's locket," she whispered, tears rising. "I thought it lost forever." Patience leaned closer, astonished. Where did it come from?" Samuel's face crumpled with relief, a broken man tasting mercy at last. He lifted the locket with trembling fingers. "The Lord restores what was taken," he said hoarsely. "Perhaps we were too quick to judge." All eyes turned to Joshua. He bowed his head humbly. "I found it days ago," he admitted, voice thick with modesty. "But I did not wish to cause strife in the household. I feared Thomas might only be further accused, so I prayed for guidance. Last night, I felt compelled to leave it where it might be discovered. Perhaps that was God's answer." It was masterful, self-effacing, sacrificial, laced with the language of faith Samuel so desperately clung to. Martha reached across the table and touched his hand. "You've been a blessing to this house, Joseph. Truly." Ezra snorted, but even he was silenced by the performance. Samuel nodded, eyes glistening. "The boy speaks truth. He has shown more grace in his short time here than my own son." Thomas's chair scraped sharply against the floor. His face burned, his throat a knot of rage and despair. "It's a lie," he cried. "He planted it. Enough." Samuel's fist struck the table, rattling the cups. "You shame your mother, your sisters, and this house with your malice. You will hold your tongue, Thomas, or I'll have you from this table." The boy's breath came ragged, his vision blurred with tears. He looked from one face to another. Martha, sorrowful but doubtful. Patience, avoiding his gaze. Even Rebecca, pale in her chair, whispering, "Thomas, don't." And Joseph, Joshua, smiled faintly, just enough for Thomas to see, no one else. The noose had tightened. The family believed. Thomas was alone. Thomas did not eat. His plate sat untouched as the others bowed their heads in thanks. His father's command rang in his ears, each word heavier than the storm beating on the roof. "You will hold your tongue, or I'll have you from this table." He wanted to scream, to tear the locket from Samuel's hands and shatter it on the floor, to make them all see. But the memory of his father's rage stopped him cold. If he defied him again, he might not only be cast from the table, he might be cast from the house. And then Joshua would win without lifting another finger. So Thomas sat, hands clenched, head lowered, while Joshua played his part to perfection. "Brother Samuel," Joshua said gently, "do not be too harsh on the boy. His zeal blinds him, but perhaps with discipline and prayer he may yet be guided." Patience nodded quickly. "Yes, Father, Thomas is only spirited. He doesn't mean to wound." But Ezra leaned back, grinning as if he smelled blood. "Spirited? Ha! The boy's half wild. He mouths off, prowls about the cellar, shouts accusations against a godly man. If Samuel won't whip the devil out of him, I'll do it myself." Samuel's face darkened. He glanced at Thomas, and for the first time his anger carried something colder. Shame. "He will learn respect, Ezra. I will see to it." Joshua lowered his eyes, his voice soft, almost sorrowful. Sometimes it is mercy to correct a child early, before bitterness takes root. Better he resent the rod than lose his soul. The words slid like oil into Samuel's heart. He nodded slowly, gripping the locket so tightly his knuckles whitened. Thomas felt the walls closing in. His sisters would not save him. His father was slipping further into Joseph's snare. Ezra would only delight in his pain. He had one choice left: to wait, to endure, and to find proof so undeniable that even Samuel could not turn away. But each day he delayed, Joshua's grip grew stronger. That night, lying awake in the loft, Thomas whispered into the dark, not to God. God had abandoned him, but to himself. "I will find it, whatever he hides, wherever he hides it, I will find it. And then they will know." But beneath him, in the quiet kitchen, Joshua spoke in low tones with Ezra. The words meant never to reach Thomas's ears. "By the week's end, Samuel will see. The boy is unfit for this house, and when he is gone, there will be peace." The snow had begun to crust hard along the fence lines, a white prison hemming the farm from the world beyond. Each morning, Thomas rose before the others, slipping out into the bitter air, scouring every corner of the barn, the sheds, even the half-frozen creek bed, for some trace of Joshua's thefts. But the man left nothing behind. No loose coin, no trinket, no scrap of paper. Yet Thomas knew. The locket had not been chance. Joshua had more. Proof lay hidden somewhere, waiting. If Thomas could uncover it, he could break the lie before it consumed them all. Down in the house, another plot was weaving. Ezra sat by the hearth, mug of ale in his hand, listening as Joshua spoke in his patient, steady tones. "The boy has a restless spirit. I've watched him slip about in the night. It grieves me to say it, Brother Ezra, but he stirs mischief where he goes." Ezra's lips curled. "I said as much. The brat's a danger. Joshua's eyes lowered piously. Not danger yet, but he resists his father's rule, and rebellion unchecked will rot a household from within. He paused, then let the words drop like stones into water. If Samuel cannot bring him to heel, then perhaps the boy must be sent away. Ezra chuckled darkly. At last, the godly man speaks plain. I'll have no pity when the whip cracks across his back, or when he's shown the road. Joshua only sighed, a weary shepherd speaking of a lost lamb. Pray it does not come to that, but for the sake of the family, we must be ready. Upstairs, Thomas crouched in the loft, listening through the boards. His breath caught, his heart hammering. They meant to drive him out. Not days from now, soon. And if he failed to find proof before then, the truth would die with him. Cast out, disowned, silenced. He pressed his forehead to the floor, whispering through clenched teeth, I will not go. I will find it. I will show them. But be Elo. Joshua rose from his chair, laid a hand on Ezra's shoulder, and smiled. The Lord tests us, brother. But soon, the house will be at peace. The clue came by accident. Thomas had searched the barn again, desperate, his fingers numb from the cold. He lifted hay bales, pried at loose boards, even dug through the old feed bins. Nothing. The walls themselves seemed to mock him. But as he turned to leave, a draft caught his eye. A narrow slit of air, whispering through a seam in the floorboards of the loft above the stalls. He climbed quickly, knees knocking against the ladder, and pressed his palm against the wood. One plank felt loose. Heart hammering, Thomas worked at it with his penknife until it lifted just enough. Beneath, in the dark hollow, something glinted. He reached in and drew out a pouch. It was leather, worn and cracked, but heavy in his hands. He untied the cord and gasped. Coins, silver and gold, more than he had ever seen in one place. And not just coins, buttons, rings, small trinkets, a brooch that had belonged to Martha's mother. All of it stolen, hidden away. Thomas's throat went dry. Proof. At last, undeniable proof. But then he froze. A sound below, the barn door creaking open. Through the cracks of the loft he saw Joshua enter, moving with quiet certainty. He carried no lantern. He knew the dark well enough. Slowly he walked toward the stalls, his gaze lifting. Thomas clutched the pouch to his chest, scarcely daring to breathe. If Joshua climbed the ladder now, it would be over. But Joshua did not climb. Instead, he knelt by the stall and pressed his hand to the same loose board Thomas had uncovered. When he found the hiding place empty, he did not startle. He did not curse. He only smiled faintly in the dark, as though he had expected it. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Careful, boy. The snare you spring may close on your own neck." And he turned, leaving the barn as silently as he had come. Thomas's hands shook around the pouch. Proof was his at last, but Joshua knew he had it. The war was no longer hidden. It had begun in earnest. Thomas burst into the house, snow still clinging to his boots. The pouch clutched tight against his chest. His face was wild with urgency, his breath white in the kitchen's dim light. "Father," he cried, "I've found it. His hiding place. The truth. You must see." Samuel looked up from the table, startled, his brow furrowing at once. "Thomas, what folly now?" "It's no folly." Thomas stumbled forward, spilling the pouch onto the boards. Coins scattered, rings spun across the floor. Martha's brooch skittered under the chair. "Here, all of it. He's been stealing from us, lying to us. This is the proof." Martha gasped, dropping her spoon. Patience covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Even Rebecca rose half from her chair, her eyes wide with fear. For a moment, a fragile moment, Samuel's stern mask cracked. His eyes fell on the brooch, unmistakable, the very piece he had once sworn was lost to time. Doubt flickered in him, like a candle fighting the wind. And then Joshua entered. He did not rush. He did not startle. He simply walked into the room with his usual calm, his hands folded before him. His eyes fell upon the spilled treasure, and he sighed softly, as though grieved beyond words. "Ah," he said, shaking his head with sorrow. "So it comes to this." Thomas whirled on him. You planted it. You hid it in the barn." But Joshua looked only at Samuel, his voice low and steady. "Brother, I have prayed for this. I feared the boy's envy would drive him into sin. Now he has taken from my keeping what was never his. See how he casts it before you, as though it were proof of my guilt, when, in truth—" He spread his hands, palms open, pure. "When in truth, I gathered these things for safekeeping, against thieves, against decay. Always I meant to return them." Samuel's face hardened again. "You claim this treasure was in your charge?" "I do, brother," Joshua said, humbly. "I thought it wise not to burden you with worry in these hard times, and I believed, I hoped, that the boy might never stumble into temptation." His eyes turned, soft and sorrowful, toward Thomas. "But temptation found him first." Ezra barked a laugh. "Ha! Caught with the goods in his own hands. The whelp's a thief." "No!" Thomas shouted, voice breaking. "He lies. Father, you must believe me. I found it there, hidden in the floor. He was already coming to fetch it." But Samuel's gaze was cold now, wounded, shamed. The flicker of doubt was gone. "You disgrace me," he said, his voice low, trembling with anger. "You disgrace this house." Thomas's knees weakened. The pouch at his feet felt like a noose around his neck, and Joshua, standing calm in the doorway, let his lips curl in the faintest, secret smile. Just for him, the kitchen held its breath. Only the storm outside dared to speak, rattling the shutters like a drumbeat of judgment. Samuel rose slowly from his chair. He held the brooch in his hand, but his eyes fixed on Thomas with a weight that crushed the boy's chest. "You have lied once. You have slandered a godly man. And now," his fist tightened around the brooch, "you bring stolen goods into my house and cast them before me as if I were a fool." Thomas's voice cracked. "Father, I swear it. He planted them, not me. He's twisting it all." But the words fell into silence. No one moved to defend him. Martha dabbed her eyes, whispering, "Oh, Thomas." Patience would not meet his gaze. Even Rebecca, pale and frightened, shook her head as if begging him not to speak further. Ezra slammed his palm on the table, rising with a grin. "The rod, Samuel. The boy's long overdue for it." Samuel's jaw tightened. He looked to Joshua. "What say you, Joseph?" Joshua bowed his head, his humility a blade honed to perfection. "Do not cast him out, brother. Not yet. He is young, and youth stumbles. Let him be chastened, that he might rise again cleansed. A sharp lesson may save his soul from ruin." Samuel nodded slowly, his decision sealing like ice. He turned back to Thomas, his voice grim. "You will taste the rod tonight, and if your spirit does not bend, then you will leave this house, never to darken its door again." Thomas staggered back, his breath torn from him. Punishment was one thing, but expulsion? To be cast out into the snow, alone with nowhere to go? His throat burned. His vision swam. Joshua stepped forward, laying a hand gently on Samuel's arm. Mercy and anger, brother. The Lord disciplines those he loves. And though his voice was soft, his eyes flicked to Thomas for just an instant. They gleamed with triumph. The boy's chest heaved. His proof had been turned against him. His father's trust poisoned. His fate sealed. Yet in that moment, a thought cut through the despair, sharp as broken glass. If he could not tell them the truth, he would have to show it. Somehow. Before the rod fell, the house had gone silent after Samuel's decree. The sisters had drifted to their beds in tears. Martha lingered by the fire in prayer, and Ezra sharpened his knife with a smile, waiting for the rod to fall. Thomas lay awake in the loft, the pouch hidden beneath his blanket. His heart pounded with a single, desperate truth. Words would never be enough. Only revelation, open, undeniable, could break Joshua's spell. So, in the dead of night, he crept from his bed and down to the kitchen. The fire still smoldered in the hearth. The pouch trembled in his hands. He pulled it open and scattered its contents across the table. Coins, jewels, Martha's brooch, every piece gleaming in the firelight. Then he struck the poker against the iron, loud and sharp. The house stirred. Doors opened. Feet thundered down the stairs. Samuel was first, lantern in hand, fury already kindled. Boy, what madness! But then Joshua appeared, calm as ever, his face a mask of sorrow. He stepped forward, ready to speak his practiced lie. And Thomas, with all the strength of his youth, hurled the pouch into the flames. The leather caught at once, the fire flaring bright. Coins clattered, rings hissed, the brooch shrieked in the heat. For a breathless instant, the family watched in horror as their lost treasures blackened and burned. "See," Thomas cried, his voice breaking. "I would sooner see them perish in the fire than let him twist them into chains around us. If I were a thief, would I burn my prize? If I were a liar, would I risk my father's wrath so? Look, Father, look at him." All eyes turned. Joshua's composure faltered. His hand had twitched, instinctive, reaching toward the fire before he caught himself. The flicker of greed, of possession, flashed plain for all to see. It was enough. Martha gasped. Patience whispered, "Oh, Lord." Samuel's face hardened as he saw what he had refused to see. "Joseph," he said, voice low, dangerous, "explain yourself." Joshua opened his mouth, but no words came. Ezra snarled, stepping back as though struck. "You—" Samuel advanced, seizing Joshua by the collar. "You dare bring corruption under my roof. You dare pit me against my own blood." His voice thundered, shaking the rafters. Get out before I cast you to the snow, myself." For the first time, Joshua's mask cracked. The calm was gone. His eyes darted, wild and calculating, but the room had turned. He tore free of Samuel's grasp and fled into the night, the storm swallowing him whole. Silence. Only the fire remained, devouring the last of the stolen things. Samuel stood, chest heaving, then turned to his son. For a long, terrible moment, Thomas thought the blow would still come. But instead, Samuel's hand, trembling, heavy, fell upon his shoulder. "My son," he said, voice rough, "forgive me." Thomas closed his eyes, the weight of it all breaking over him. His father's faith restored, his name redeemed, but at a price. The treasures were ash, The family would never be whole again. And out there, in the dark, Joshua still walked. The storm raged on, but in the farmhouse, for the first time in weeks, the dawn felt possible.